Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome back to another card video. Today is my third card in my capsule paper crafting challenge for the month of August. Took a little break, had some other design deadlines, and now I'm back into it. And today I'm going to be using those metallic watercolor paints from Altenew that I showed you when I showed like everything that's in my box for the month. I'm going to be using some black watercolor paper with them because I think they really sing. The colors look amazing on black watercolor paper. So I'm going to be using that as well as the Mama Elephant stamp set. So let's get into it. So here we are. This is the Little Agenda Spaceship stamp set from Mama Elephant. I'm going to take it out of the packaging, but I'm actually going to do some painting first. Starting out with the black watercolor paper. This is a Stonehenge watercolor paper from Legion. And I'm cutting it down to 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. So it's exactly the size of my card, but I'm going to tape off the edges. Eventually I want to cut it down a little bit smaller anyway, so I'm not worried about the tape pulling off any of the paper. I'm now using my metallic watercolor paints from Altenew, and I'm going to be painting sort of a cloud pattern almost. I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do with this particular idea. In fact, I wasn't really convinced that I would use this particular version because I wanted to sort of experiment and see how it went. And then if it turned out well, then I'd use it. But I really wasn't married to the idea. I was kind of going into this with an idea of experimenting and seeing what could be done. Now, if I was to do this pattern all over again, I would start with the back layers and then paint forward. So I would start more near the 2/3 top area of the watercolor paper, like this purple section. I would start with that first and then paint the red and gold because just the way it worked out, I think it would have looked a little bit better. At this point, this is when I was like, okay, I kind of can see the vision of this, of where it's going. I want layers of clouds in different colors. So I wanted to redefine the lines on some of these cloud shapes to make sure that they looked very intentional. So after I dried the first initial, or I think I dried in between here too, after it was all dry, I then came back over and redefined the edges of these cloud shapes. So I came in and went over that red area once again and kind of added the paint at the top edge of the cloud and then got my brush wet and sort of pulled the color down because I didn't want all the color concentrated at that very top edge of the cloud. But by having that top edge of the cloud be where I apply the paint, at the very beginning of the cloud shape, that's going to be the most intense area. After all of those were dry, I grabbed some white gouache and put it on my paintbrush and just splattered a bunch all over this so it looks a little bit like space. Hit that with my heat tool, and then I'm going to work on the little images. So I'm first going to stamp the spaceship in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This is a waterproof ink, so it's perfect for watercoloring. And I'm using the Canson XL watercolor paper. I'm also stamping the little cat image inside the little spaceship or the rocket. And then I'm going to be painting this with my watercolors. This is the small watercolor set that I picked for use during this month's capsule paper crafting challenge. I'm not entirely familiar with this watercolor set, and if you followed my last capsule challenge, you know that before I even started the month, I did a color chart using those paints, and I really got to know those paints when I did that. And I haven't done that with this paint set yet because I've used the same paints but in a different palette. So I thought I would be familiar with them, but I'm not as familiar with where these colors are located and kind of mixing them. So I think I will be doing a color chart very soon. At this point, I decided that I wanted to use the metallic watercolor paints on the rocket as well. But these metallic paints look better, in my opinion, on a dark surface. So I grabbed my black marker that I included in my capsule for this month and just colored in the areas where I wanted to have the metallic paint. So on the wing shapes, the very top tip, and also the band at the bottom. I then grabbed a very, very thick black watercolor paint and painted around the cat's head so that it looks like we're looking into a window. Added a little more shading on the outer edge of this rocket And then I came in with some small details on the cat. I want to give this cat some stripes like my two cats, Sophie and Daphne. So I thought I'd just add those stripes on there. I also came in with a little bit more of a very watered down black to add shading around the outer edge of the cat, just to give it a little bit more dimension. And then I made the cat's nose pink. Since I lost the edge on the star on the rocket, I came in with my black pen and just filled that in. And then I fussy cut this out, trying to be as careful as possible right up to the edge of the rocket. Now, normally I would use a black brush tip marker to paint the edges of my shape, but I didn't have a black marker. So this time I took a very, very thick black watercolor paint and a brush and just very carefully painted the edges of my watercolor piece here. This is going to give it a nice black finished edge. And especially since I'm going to be putting this on top of that mostly black background, I wanted to make sure that the white edges of the watercolor paper were obscured. For my greeting, I wanted to have it on top of a purple shade, and I wanted it to match the exact metallic purple that's already painted on the background. So I used a scrap of that same black watercolor paper and coated it in the purple metallic paint. And then stamped the greeting for my card in some clear embossing ink from Simon Says Stamp. This is a really sticky ink. I normally use Versamark, but I need to get a refill for my Versamark. So this month I'm rocking the clear embossing ink from Simon. I stamped that and then coated it in some alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. It's a nice dark white embossing powder. I'll heat this with my heat tool until it's smooth and melted, and then I can trim this out for my card later. I then removed my background from the watercolor board. You can see that it pulls up a little bit of that paper. I knew it would do that, but I was okay with it, and I had planned to sacrifice a little bit of the size. So the finished size on this is 5 inches tall by 3 3/4 wide. I prepped my card base. This is some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White 110-pound cardstock. I scored that at 5.5 to make a top folding card. And then I put a bunch of adhesive on the back of my watercolor panel because, as I've said before, no saggy middles. And then place it onto my card. The last thing to do was to adhere my greeting and also my little rocket image straight to the card front. So I trimmed down my greeting, put foam adhesive on the back, placed that on the card, and then I also placed my little cat and the rocket on the card as well. You can see that beautiful sheen on the metallic paints. I think it turned out so beautiful. I really love how that turned out. It sort of took an unexpected twist, but I went with it and I really enjoy how it turned out. I hope you guys enjoyed the card for today, and it gives you some other ideas on how to use your metallic watercolor paints or even just any type of opaque paint that will go over dark surfaces. I think it's a really fun technique to do. Thanks so much for watching today. On screen, I've got 2 more videos for you to check out. These are going to be previous capsule cards, and Sophie is meowing. Hey, Soph. You guys hear that meowing? She's like, feed me, feed me. Anyway, thanks so much for watching today. I will see you guys in another card video very soon.